On a cold autumn night in 1700, the halls of Madrid's Royal Alcazar lay silent under drifting incense smoke. Flickering candles cast trembling reflections on the polished marble floor. In the center of the great chapel stood an oversized iron-bound coffin so large it had to be specially constructed to hold Charles II's bloated corpse. Despite the copper nails driven in haste, a dark, viscous fluid seeped from its seams, pooling in thick rivulets like dried blood. Outside, stray dogs howled as they picked at the leaking ichor, their low growls echoing through the empty corridors. Palace guards drew back in horror, unwilling even to speak, for to utter the king's name in such a state was to risk charges of treason. Once celebrated as the pinnacle of Spanish power, this desolate chamber now reeked of decay and dread. Just 40 years earlier, the birth of Charles II had been hailed with cannon salutes and grand celebrations. Historians dubbed him the hope of the Habsburg realm. Today, that very realm's obsession with pure blood had turned its heir into a pitiful victim of genetic ruin. The stench of rot drifting through 3 antechambers told a story no herald's proclamation could soften. A dynasty poisoned itself from within. How did this frail, haunted man come to govern the mightiest empire in Europe and perish in such disgrace? The answer lies not in foreign invasion or civil war, but in centuries of near-sibling marriages and the relentless pursuit of inbred perfection. In this leaking coffin lay the final proof that absolute power, when blinded by arrogance, collapses under the weight of its own hubris. By the late 1600s, the Spanish Habsburgs ruled an empire spanning Europe, the Americas, and parts of Africa. From the granaries of Andalusia to the silver mines of Peru, their wealth appeared limitless. Court life glittered with lavish banquets, nightly masquerades, and orchestras playing into dawn. Yet beneath the gold tapers and embroidered tapestries lay one grim conviction: only pure Habsburg blood could secure eternal dominion. For over 2 centuries, royals married first cousins, uncles wed nieces, and every generation wove tighter the web of inbreeding. Official records now confirm that Charles II carried the highest inbreeding coefficient of any monarch, an invisible inheritance that doomed him from birth. When he arrived in the nursery in November 1661, Tsk Toes announced a new dawn for Spain, but the infant prince barely cried. Nurses whispered alarm as he failed to thrive. Tutors later noted his stammering speech and unsteady gait. Every lesson and play hour was replaced by strict schedules and medical examinations, as if Charles were a mechanism to be calibrated rather than a child to be cherished. Those earliest years marked the planting of a tragic seed. The same marriages, meant to fortify Habsburg rule, instead weakened its bloodline. Soon, the once vaunted physiology of Spanish royalty would betray them, revealing the fatal cost of crossing familial boundaries. From his first steps in the palace courtyard, Charles too moved with an awkward shamble. Silk-draped pages and eunuchs watched anxiously as the prince's weak body struggled with each motion. Laughter and games belonged to other children. For Charles, there were doctors' visits and whispered prayers in dimly lit chambers. When he began lessons at age 8, much later than typical royalty, each word emerged in a halting tremor. He ate sparingly, for his misaligned jaw and decaying teeth made chewing a torment. Court physicians probed his sores and ulcers, leaving scars both skin-deep and soul-deep. Journal entries from 1670 describe him as pale, tired, and already touched by sorrow beyond his years. Despite the sumptuous silks and pearl-studded collars, Charles felt imprisoned in a gilded cage. Officials hailed him as the future savior of Habsburg Spain, yet denied him the simplest comforts of childhood. Even the palace gardeners remarked on his isolation. His footsteps echoed alone down corridors that once rang with music. That lonely upbringing forged a man torn between the grandeur of his birthright and the agony of his flesh. The weight of an entire dynasty rested on his frail shoulders, a burden no child could have borne. In every silent night and shadowed hallway, the echoes of royal ambition turned his life into a grim prelude to the tragedy that would claim him. Charles reached adulthood under a heavy shadow. His first marriage in 1679 was to Marie-Louise of Orleans, a charming French princess chosen to strengthen Spain's alliance with France. Court festivities in Madrid sparkled with fireworks and glittering gowns. Yet behind the scenes, Marie-Louise faced a lonely, bewildering reality. Charles's frail body, bent by years of inbreeding, could not produce an heir. Day after day, palace whispers blamed the queen for their childlessness, ignoring the king's visible suffering. Marie-Louise withdrew into her private apartments, hiding tears behind perfumed handkerchiefs until her untimely death at 24, widowed and still without an heir. Charles was hastily wed a second time in 1689 to Maria Anna of Neuburg, a dignified German princess renowned for her piety and intelligence. The hope was that fresh blood might rescue the Habsburg line. Maria Anna arrived in Madrid amid grand processions and joyous crowds. Yet she soon discovered the same grim pattern. Charles's health continued to decline. Swelling limbs pinioned him to his bed. Chain-smoking tobacco failed to soothe his chronic pain, and ulcerated sores spread across his legs as months turned to years. Each royal ceremony, each carefully staged portrait tried to mask the truth. Maria Anna endured the cruel optics of regal life, smiling beside her husband in public while nursing him by night. Hearing every judgmental whisper about her failure to bear children, the palace corridors that once echoed with music and laughter now rang with the hushed hum of gossip and pity. In both marriages, the personal tragedies of Charles and his wives revealed a broader catastrophe. The Habsburg obsession with pure blood had led them to terrified weddings and desperate alliances. But no ceremony could overcome genetic fate. Their two unions, shrouded in gold and pageantry, became symbols of a dynasty's last, futile attempts to preserve itself only to watch its roots crumble from within. Charles II's final years were defined by a body that seemed to rebel against its royal birthright. His once fair skin turned sallow. Limbs swelled with edema so severe that he required pulleys and harnesses to move between chambers. The infamous Habsburg jaw protruded sharply, making chewing, agonizing, and speech nearly unintelligible. Open ulcers festered on his legs, exuding a foul odor that spread through the corridors. Announcing his arrival before any trumpeter could sound his name, court physicians, armed with 17th-century treatments, cauterization by hot irons, mercury-laced poultices, frequent bloodletting did more harm than good. Each intervention left raw wounds or toxic scarring. Medical diaries describe how bone peeked through rotting flesh, how the king's screams echoed off marble walls, and how courtiers dared not flinch at his cries, for to do so risked instant dismissal or worse. Beyond the physical agony, Charles's mind suffered too. Modern historians speculate that repeated strokes and chronic pain fueled bouts of paranoia. He came to fear conspiracies, ordering the execution of close advisors over whispered rumors. In the dead of night, he would awaken in terror, convinced poison lurked in every goblet. To thwart imagined plots, he mandated that servants taste each dish before it reached his table, and had utensils meticulously inspected and washed by hand. Yet these frantic precautions offered no comfort. The royal diet, 5,000 calories of heavy meats, bread soaked in wine, minimal vegetables combined with his enforced immobility to accelerate his decline. He grew so obese that corridors were widened to accommodate his litter. Once an athletic youth admired across Europe, by age 45, Charles had become a grotesque caricature of kingship, a living emblem of how inbreeding had hollowed out the vigor of an entire dynasty. In late autumn 1700, Charles II's suffering reached its climax. His breathing grew labored. Low fevers surged and receded. Witnesses reported delirious mutterings, snatches of his wife's names, pleas for relief, and urgent prayers to God. Finally, on November 1st, he slipped into unconsciousness and never awoke. Even in death, his body refused to lie still. Decomposition progressed rapidly. The specially built coffin, reinforced with iron belts, was unable to contain the gases and fluids that welled up from his swelled limbs and festering sores. During the state funeral preparations at El Escorial, attendants recoiled as a putrid ichor seeped from the hermetically sealed casket, leaving dark stains on polished stone. Stray dogs, drawn by the stench, forced their way into the chapel and lapped the fluid from the floor. Chroniclers recorded this macabre scene with trembling detail, proof that even death could not spare the last Habsburg king from public humiliation. Despite the horror, court officials maintained an air of solemn dignity. The funeral, delayed by 3 weeks to manage the odor, proceeded with full regal ceremony on November 24th. The emperor's body, still unrecognizably disfigured, was finally interred alongside his only surviving heir in St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Yet the echo of that leaking coffin, the sight of dogs amid royal banners, became the enduring image of Charles II's end, a grotesque testament to the lethal consequences of incestuous ambition. Charles II's death without an heir plunged Europe into chaos. Competing dynasties saw opportunity in Spain's vacant throne. Louis XIV of France backed his grandson, while the Austrian Habsburgs claimed rightful succession through maternal lines. In 1701, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted, engulfing the continent in a conflict lasting over a decade. Battles raged from the plains of the Netherlands to the hills of Catalonia. Cities burned. Armies of tens of thousands clashed beneath shifting alliances. Trade routes were disrupted. Economies crumbled. French forces pressed into northern Spain, while British and Dutch fleets blockaded the Mediterranean. The conflict drew in nearly every European power, turning the legacy of Habsburg inbreeding into the spark that ignited a continent-wide inferno. Meanwhile, Mortia Anna of Newburgh, Charles's second widow, watched from the shadows, bearing the weight of blame and sorrow. As both victim and scapegoat, she lived under the pall of a war neither she nor her husband had sought. The Spanish people endured famine and plague in the ruined fields, their loyalties torn between foreign crowns. Ultimately, the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 carved Spain into pieces, marking the end of a unified empire and cementing the political fragmentation that Charles's tragic lineage had helped unleash. The story of Charles II is not merely a morbid curiosity, but a stark lesson in human hubris. A dynasty's obsession with pure blood generated a king so weakened that his body betrayed him at every turn. From palace celebrations to fetid coffin chambers, the arc of his life reveals how ignoring nature's boundaries leads to self-destruction. Today, the caution echoes in modern debates over genetics and ethics. The same arrogance that believed inbred royalty could claim divine favor reminds us how easily ambition can override compassion. True strength lies not in unbroken lineage, but in humility before life's limits. As we reflect on Charles II's final breath and the war that followed, we confront our own era's temptations: power without empathy, purity without perspective. May his tragic end guide us to honor science, respect human dignity, and remember that all crowns, no matter how resplendent, must eventually bow to the immutable laws of nature.